our prisoners were being tortured by the North Vietnamese. Johnson administration wanted to hide that fact for some reason. Nixon said, no, let's play it up and we'll get international support for the plight of our prisoners. Great service on his part. And in the Gulf War, Lieutenant Commander Mark Fox, now Admiral Mark Fox, I think Vice Admiral, shot down an Iraqi jet. So just an example of the different types of folks who've been in the 7th Fleet, have led the 7th Fleet, and done great things. This last example, again, going back to the patrol analogy, this is the crew of the EP-3E. Remember the patrol plane flying off China's Hainan Island in 2001. Some Yahoo Chinese pilot rammed our plane and sent it into a deep, he was killed, the Chinese pilot was killed and his plane crashed. Sent our EP-3E spiraling down to a similar fate. The commanding officer, Lieutenant Shane Osborne, righted the plane, got him to the island of Hainan safely. But in the meantime, the crew, the 23 members of the crew, in the back, busily burning documents, wrecking communications equipment and other sensitive equipment. So they all got back after a time in captivity. And the members of the crew, other than Shane Osborne and his co-pilot, were given, I think, distinguished flying crosses, but the crew got air medals, men and women. And those, so they suffered captivity, and that's what the men and women of the 7th Fleet have contributed, what the fleet has done in a thumbnail sketch. I mean, there's much more detail to be learned. Hopefully, some of you can get the book, if you will, from the GPO or the PDF copy, and we can go from there. Anyway, there's the Blue Ridge and the shadow of Mount Fuji, some of the weapon systems used by the fleet, and that's the end of my presentation. I'm prepared. If you'd like to ask some questions, we have a few minutes, I think. Randy? John Carlin. And please speak into the microphones because they're recording this. Can you hear me? No.
Thanks, Ed. I'd like you to elaborate on your brief comments about China, but before that, here's the context. Given that China has just launched or is about to launch its first carrier, given that it's ramping up its naval building program to project power, secondly, given that we are committed to a swing to the east now, both diplomatically and militarily, what's going to be the role of the 7th Fleet in all of this?
I think the answer to that is the role of the 7th Fleet will be similar to what it has been its role since 1945. We know the administration's policy is the pivot to Asia, which to me it's a little surprising. I mean, there's more emphasis on Asia and more forces in the Far East, but I don't see much of a pivot. I mean, we've been there from day one. It's just more focus, I guess, less focus from the wars ashore in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Chinese Navy, of course, is a modernizing force, a growing force, and of some concern to the United States, and rightly so, and to our allies in the Far East. One of the things that I've done in the book is to track our relationship with the People's Republic of China. Now that has gone hot and cold. I mean, there are various times when we've gotten along famously with the PLA and the PLAN. In particular, in the era of Deng Xiaoping, after Mao Zedong passed away. Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese at that point were very much afraid of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had threatened a nuclear attack on China. They had a mutual defense treaty with Vietnam, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. China was feeling surrounded. And so we had common cause at that point. After Vietnam, as John and others know, our military in general, and the Navy in particular, were hurting. Didn't have enough modern ships, all kinds of problems. So us working with the Chinese was a mutual benefit thing. However, there have been other times when it's been more conflict than cooperation. And I'm teaching a course at Georgetown on this very topic. It's been more conflict than cooperation, unfortunately. We fought them in Korea. We fought them in Vietnam. It's not well known that some 300,000 Chinese military folks were in North Vietnam during the war, manning anti-aircraft weapons, rebuilding dikes, railroads, and the rest. Chinese military folks died in that conflict. Our folks died in that conflict. In fact, that's one of the, just an aside, one of the ironies to me is that here we are fighting each other in Vietnam, and at the same time you have Hong Kong, the British Crown colony, right off China. And our ships will be operating in the Gulf of Tonkin, and then they go into Hong Kong for R&R. Just a bizarre set of circumstances. Again, the importance, I think, of sea power, because not only did China not want to get into a war with Great Britain, but because of the presence of our ships in and out and our close connection with Britain, they didn't push that button either. But it's been, like I say, confrontation. Remember, we inadvertently struck the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in the 1990s. We had the episode of the EP-3 in 2001, and as recently as 2009 in the South China Sea, Chinese vessels interfered with our ship Impeccable, tried to cut the tow-to-ray cable. So it's gone back and forth. Now we do have a mutual maritime consultative agreement where we're supposed to meet both sides in either country on a periodic basis. That happens sometimes, other times it doesn't for political reasons. It's my hope, and in fact in the book you'll see there's a question mark, basically, whither China? Which way are we going with China? It could go either way, in my view. What I think is a saving grace is that our economies are so intertwined at this point. We need each other. The world needs us to be getting along for their own economic and prosperity and stability. I hope that holds out. But as someone once said to me, yeah, well, Germany and Great Britain were great trading partners just before 1914. Yeah. So, okay, a long answer to your question, John. Yes, sir.
How much has the fact that we no longer have we no longer have our bases in the Philippines at Subic Bay and Clark Field, how much has that hurt the 7th Fleet and as well as the Air Force in the Far East?
I would say not having bases in the Clark Air Base and Subic Bay could have had a worse effect. Okay, fortunately, the Vietnam War was over, and that's when we really needed to have those bases to help operate in Southeast in Indochina. So it was less important afterward. However, the fleet was very stretched in the period from 1975 to, say, 1985, because not only did you have responsibilities in Northeast Asia, along the China coast, but all the way to the Indian Ocean, even in the Arabian Gulf. I mean, the fleet was down in terms of strength and resources, but it had a much greater responsibility. And the Soviets were very active in the Indian Ocean. They were active with India. So it hurt then. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, less so afterward. I mean, we had other fish to fry than Southeast Asia. That kind of went to a backwater again. Things are changing now. We have some repair facility in Singapore that allows our ships to go in and get repairs and supplies and whatnot. The Australians, of course, are letting Marines come into parts of northern Australia. And the Vietnamese, ironically, are very much interested in a closer relationship with the U.S. military and the 7th Fleet.
Yeah, Vietnam has a long-standing hatred of the Chinese, They remember that China occupied them roughly from about much of the first millennium A.D., about 1,000 years there, so.
Case that wasn't picked up on, you weren't Mike, but the point he made was that China and Vietnam have had centuries-old animosities. That's true, but I think Also, the Vietnamese are very pragmatic, very realistic. And you might think, I mean, they still have a communist government in Hanoi, but they are finding some common cause with the United States because of fears of what might happen in the neighborhood. So, who once said that a country has only interests, not friends? Something along those lines, but and that's what it is. And I think it's clear when China does things that upset the neighbors, they tend to pull together. And so.
I was going to say we have time for one more question. If somebody's not going to, please, if you could come up to the microphone, Lieutenant. And,
Sir, what role does 7th Fleet have in a peaceful resolution over the Senkaku Islands?
I'm sorry?
What role does 7th Fleet have over a resolution over the Senkaku Islands?
The question was, what influence would the 7th Fleet have over resolution of the problem with the Diaoyu or Senkaku Islands, a big bone of contention between China and Japan at the present moment? I'm not going to get into current policy because I don't know what current policy is. And if anything, just reading the Washington Post, I get the sense that we're standing back and we're saying, why don't you two countries resolve this and figure it out? So I don't think we've taken a position, and at least I don't know if we have. But it's troubling, not only Diaoyu and the Senkaku, but the Dokdo, or Takashima Island. It's the same place, different name, between South Korea and Japan. Now, these are very close allies of ours. It's troubling to see them disputing. And the president of South Korea recently went to the island to stake South Korea's claim. Well, and I think, I hope we have some influence where we can say, hey, you guys, we're friends. Why don't you just put this on the back burner and deal with it 30 years from now? But who knows? But these are very troubling things, territorial disputes, especially when there are resources potentially there. That causes problems.
well, with that, I'd like to thank Ed Marolda for a very fine presentation on 7th Fleet. And a round of applause, please, for the speaker. One more time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Our next event will be on the 23rd of October, 2012, here again. It'll be a little later start. It'll be a 12:30 start. The presenter will be David Coleman, and he'll be discussing the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I invite you to attend that event in about 4 weeks as well. Thank you very much, though, for coming out today. Appreciate it.